The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty road leading out of Cedar Springs, Wyoming, painting the prairie grass in shades of burnt gold. Jacob Thornton guided his wagon along the rutted path, his mind occupied with the coming harvest and the perpetual silence that had become his constant companion these past 3 years. At 42, Jacob had accepted his solitude. The farm demanded everything he had, leaving little room for anything else. His hands were calloused, his back strong, but his heart had grown quiet after Margaret's death. The townspeople had stopped trying to introduce him to eligible women. A widower with no children, no charm, and a temperament as rough as the Wyoming winter. He knew what they whispered. The glint of white caught his eye first. Something lay crumpled at the side of the road, stark against the brown earth. Jacob's gut tightened. He'd seen abandoned belongings before, travelers who'd lightened their load or lost their way, but as his wagon drew closer, his breath caught in his throat. It wasn't belongings, it was a woman. She lay motionless in the dirt, her wedding dress torn and stained with blood and dust. Dark hair spilled across her face, and one arm was twisted at an unnatural angle. Jacob was off the wagon before his mind fully registered what he was seeing, his boots hitting the ground hard as he ran to her side. "Ma'am!" His voice came out rougher than he intended. He knelt beside her, his large hands hovering uncertainly. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" A soft moan escaped her lips. She was alive. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. Gently, he brushed the hair from her face and sucked in a sharp breath. She was young. Couldn't be more than 22 or 23. Even covered in dirt and blood, even with her face bruised and swollen, she was beautiful. But it was the fear he saw when her eyes fluttered open that nearly broke him. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw and desperate. Don't take me back." "Easy now," Jacob murmured, his voice softening in a way it hadn't in years. "Nobody's taking you anywhere you don't want to go, but you're hurt bad. I need to get you help." Her good hand suddenly gripped his arm with surprising strength. "No doctor, no authorities, please." Jacob studied her face, seeing the terror there, the desperation. Every instinct told him this woman was running from something or someone. He should take her to town, let Sheriff Morrison handle whatever trouble she was in. That would be the sensible thing. But Jacob Thornton hadn't done the sensible thing in a long time. "All right," he said quietly, making a decision that would change both their lives. "No doctor, no authorities, but I'm taking you to my farm, and I'm going to tend those wounds. You can tell me your story when you're ready." He saw the moment she made her own decision, the moment she chose to trust him. It was there in her eyes, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. "Thank you," she breathed. Jacob carefully slid his arms beneath her, mindful of her injuries. She was lighter than he expected, fragile as a bird in his arms. As he lifted her, she whimpered in pain, and he felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd thought Margaret had taken with her. "I've got you," he murmured, surprised by the tenderness in his own voice. "You're safe now, I promise you that." He settled her gently in the wagon bed, cushioning her as best he could with the blankets he kept there. She watched him with those wide, frightened eyes, and he found himself wanting to chase away every shadow that haunted them. As he climbed back onto the wagon seat and urged the horses forward, he glanced back at her. The setting sun caught her face, illuminating the bruises, the blood, the torn wedding dress, and the question that burned in his mind: who had done this to her? And what kind of man left a woman like this to die on the side of a road? The rage that filled him was unfamiliar and fierce. He pushed it down, focusing instead on getting her home, getting her safe. "What's your name?" he asked over his shoulder, keeping his voice gentle. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, so softly, he almost missed it. Catherine Miller." "Jacob Thornton," he replied. "And Catherine," he turned to look at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You're mine now. Under my protection. Whatever you're running from, whatever happened, it doesn't matter. You're safe on my land." He saw her eyes widen at his words, saw something shift in her expression. Not fear this time, but something else. Something that made his pulse quicken in a way he hadn't felt in years. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Jacob was quiet for a moment, considering. Why was he doing this? He barely knew himself. All he knew was that the moment he'd seen her lying there, broken and abandoned, something in him had woken up, something he'd thought was dead. Maybe, he said slowly, because you needed help. And maybe because I've been alone too long to turn away someone who needs kindness. The sun was setting in earnest now, painting the sky in shades of purple and orange. Jacob's farmhouse came into view, a sturdy two-story structure he'd built with his own hands, surrounded by fields of wheat that swayed in the evening breeze. It had been a lonely place for 3 years. Tonight, for the first time since Margaret's death, it wouldn't be. As Jacob pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, Catherine struggled to sit up, her face contorting in pain. He was beside her in an instant, his large hands steadying her. "Don't move," he ordered gently. "Let me carry you. I can walk," she protested weakly, but when she tried to put weight on her leg, she cried out, "Stubborn," Jacob muttered, but there was no heat in it. He scooped her up again, cradling her against his broad chest. "I'm going to take you inside, get you cleaned up and tend those wounds. Then you can be as stubborn as you like." Catherine didn't argue this time. Instead, she let her head rest against his shoulder, and Jacob felt that crack in his chest widen just a little more. She smelled of dust and blood and fear, but underneath it all, he caught a hint of something sweet. Lavender, maybe. He carried her through the front door, past the simple furniture and quiet rooms, up the stairs to the guest bedroom. It had been Margaret's sewing room once, but Jacob had converted it after her death, unable to face the reminder of her absence. Gently, he laid Catherine on the bed. In the lamplight, he could see the full extent of her injuries more clearly. Her left arm was definitely broken, her ribs likely bruised or cracked, and cuts and bruises covered her face and exposed skin. The wedding dress was ruined, torn and bloody. "I need to examine your injuries," Jacob said quietly, his voice steady despite the fury building in him at whoever had done this. "I need to see where you're hurt." Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "The dress," she whispered. "I have to get out of this dress." Jacob understood. The dress represented whatever she was running from, whatever had brought her to that roadside. He moved to the dresser, pulling out one of his shirts and some clean cloths. "I'm going to step out while you change," he said, setting the items beside her. "Or I can help you if you need it. Whatever you're comfortable with." Catherine looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. She saw a man well past youth, with sun-weathered skin and eyes that had seen hard years. His face was rough-hewn, his hands enormous and calloused. He should have been frightening, this giant of a man who'd found her in the road. Instead, she felt safer than she had in months. "I need help," she admitted, her voice breaking. "My arm." Jacob nodded, his expression gentle. "I'll be careful, I promise." He helped her sit up, his movements slow and deliberate. The buttons on the back of the wedding dress were small, difficult for his large fingers, but he managed them with surprising gentleness. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face as the dress loosened, as the symbol of her nightmare began to fall away. "Who did this to you?" Jacob asked quietly, his voice tight with controlled anger. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Then, haltingly, she began to speak. "His name was Thomas Blackwell. My father owed him money, a lot of money from a bad investment. Thomas said he'd forgive the debt if I married him." She took a shuddering breath. "My father accepted without asking me. The wedding was today." Jacob's hands stilled on the fabric. And I learned the truth just before the ceremony. Thomas already had a wife in Denver. She tried to leave him 2 years ago and Catherine's voice broke. "He beat her so badly she can't walk anymore. His housekeeper told me, warned me, said I had to run." The rage Jacob felt was cold and deadly. "So you ran." "I took a horse and rode as far as I could, but Thomas came after me. He caught up to me about 5 miles back." Catherine's whole body was shaking now. "He dragged me off the horse, said if I wouldn't be his wife willingly, he'd make sure no other man would want me. He beat me and left me there to die." Jacob's jaw clenched so hard it hurt. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "He's not going to touch you again, ever. Do you understand me, Catherine? You're under my protection now, and I don't break my word." Catherine turned to look at him, tears streaming down her face. "You don't understand. He's powerful. He has men, money. He'll come looking for me." "Let him come," Jacob said flatly. "This is my land, and I protect what's mine." There was something in the way he said it, in the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, that made Catherine's heart skip. She barely knew this man, this rough farmer who'd found her broken on the roadside. But in this moment, She believed him, believed he would keep her safe. "Thank you," she whispered. Jacob helped her out of the ruined dress, averting his eyes as much as possible, while still ensuring she didn't hurt herself further. Once she was in his shirt, which hung to her knees, he gently examined her injuries. "Arms definitely broken," he said quietly, his fingers gentle despite their size. "Ribs are bruised, maybe cracked. These cuts need cleaning." He met her eyes. "This is going to hurt, I know." For the next hour, Jacob worked with steady hands and surprising gentleness. He set her arm as best he could, splinting it carefully. He cleaned her wounds with whiskey, murmuring apologies each time she gasped in pain. He wrapped her ribs, his touch impersonal but tender. Catherine watched him work, this stranger who'd become her savior. His hands were enormous, scarred and calloused from years of hard labor, but they moved over her injuries with the delicacy of a physician. When he concentrated, a small furrow appeared between his brows. His dark hair was shot through with grey, and lines creased his face. A man who'd lived and suffered and endured. "You've done this before," she observed quietly. "Had to." Jacob didn't look up from his work. "Living alone on a farm, you learn to tend your own injuries. And I was a field medic during the war, long time ago." "Which side?" "Union." He finished wrapping her ribs and finally met her eyes. "You should rest now. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." "Wait." Catherine reached out with her good hand, catching his sleeve. "Why are you doing this? Really?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he'd kept buried for years. 3 years ago, my wife Margaret died of fever. I was away checking the far fields when it happened. By the time I got back, she was already gone." He swallowed hard. "I wasn't there when she needed me. I couldn't save her. Maybe I can't undo that, but I can make sure you're not left alone to die on a roadside. I can give you that." Catherine felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were different. These were for him, for the pain she heard in his voice, for the loneliness that echoed in every word. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be sorry, just rest." Jacob stood, but Catherine's hand on his sleeve tightened. "Jacob, yes, thank you for finding me. Thank you for choosing to stop." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around his eyes. "Get some sleep, Catherine. You're safe here." As he left the room, closing the door quietly behind him, Catherine lay back against the pillows and let out a shuddering breath. Her body ached, her heart was bruised, but for the first time since her father had told her about the arrangement with Thomas Blackwell, she felt a flicker of hope. Downstairs, Jacob stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the darkening fields. His hands were shaking from anger, from the unfamiliar rush of protectiveness, from something else he wasn't ready to name. He'd meant what he said. Catherine was under his protection now, and if Thomas Blackwell came looking for her, he'd find out exactly what a Wyoming farmer was capable of when defending what was his. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and strangely comfortable. Jacob tended to Catherine's injuries with a gentleness that surprised them both. He brought her meals, changed her bandages, helped her to the washroom when she needed it. Through it all, he maintained a respectful distance, never touching her more than necessary, never making her feel anything but safe. Catherine, for her part, found herself fascinated by this quiet, solitary man who'd saved her life. She watched him through the window as he worked his fields, his broad shoulders straining against his shirt, his movements efficient and strong. She listened to the sounds of the house at night, his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of his bedroom door, the occasional restless pacing when he couldn't sleep. On the third morning, Catherine woke to find a vase of wildflowers on her bedside table. They were simple, prairie roses and black-eyed Susans, but they'd been arranged with care. When Jacob brought her breakfast, she gestured to them. "Thank you for the flowers," she said softly. Jacob's ears turned red. Figured the room needed some color. That's all. But Catherine saw through the gruff dismissal. This man, who claimed to have nothing to offer, was showing her kindness in small, meaningful ways. It touched something deep inside her, something that had been frozen since her father had told her about the arrangement with Thomas. "They're beautiful," she said, and meant it. As the days passed, Catherine learned more about her reluctant savior. She discovered that he rose before dawn every morning, that he checked on her at least 3 times during the night to make sure she was comfortable. She learned that he sang old hymns while he worked, that his voice was surprisingly melodic for such a large man. She learned about Margaret too, though Jacob rarely spoke of her directly. Catherine pieced together the story from things left behind: a woman's shawl still hanging in the closet, a set of china with delicate roses painted on it, a sampler on the wall with "Home is where the heart is" stitched in careful letters. She made that, Jacob said one evening, catching Catherine looking at it. Took her 6 months. She was always making things, always keeping her hands busy. His voice was distant, lost in memory. She'd hate seeing this place so quiet and empty. "Tell me about her," Catherine said gently. Jacob was silent for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sat down in the chair beside her bed, his large hands clasped between his knees. Margaret was small, like you, had red hair and freckles across her nose. She laughed at everything, said life was too short to be serious all the time. He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "We met at a church social in town. I was 28. She was 20. Her father didn't want her to marry me. Said I was too poor, too rough. But Margaret, she had a stubborn streak. She told her father she'd made her choice, and that was that." "She sounds wonderful," Catherine said. She was. "We had 14 good years together, built this farm from nothing, planned for children that never came." Jacob's voice roughened. "The fever took her in 3 days. One minute she was hanging laundry, the next she was burning up. The doctor said there was nothing to be done. I sat with her, held her hand, but she slipped away anyway." Catherine's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Jacob. It's been 3 years. Most folks think I should be over it by now. Should have remarried, moved on." He looked at Catherine then, his dark eyes intense. "But how do you move on from losing half your heart?" "Maybe you don't move on," Catherine said softly. "Maybe you just learn to carry it differently." Jacob studied her face for a long moment. "You're wise for someone so young." "How old are you, Catherine?" 23. "And you don't have to call me wise just because I've learned hard lessons too early." "What hard lessons have you learned?" Jacob asked, genuinely curious. Catherine was quiet, considering how much to share. Then she decided this man had earned her honesty. "I learned that family doesn't always mean safety. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just me and my father. He was a good man once, or I thought he was. But after some bad investments, after he started drinking, he changed. When Thomas Blackwell offered to erase his debts in exchange for my hand, my father didn't even ask if I wanted to marry him. He just accepted." "That must have hurt," Jacob said quietly. "It did. It does." Catherine blinked back tears. "I kept thinking, surely he'll change his mind. Surely he'll see that selling his daughter to pay his debts is wrong." But he didn't. The morning of the wedding, when I begged him not to make me do it, he said I was being selfish, that I should be grateful Thomas wanted me at all. Jacob's hands clenched into fists. "Your father was wrong. Dead wrong. I know that now, but in that moment I felt worthless, like I was just a commodity to be traded." Catherine wiped at her eyes. "That's why I believed the housekeeper when she told me about Thomas's wife, because part of me had already known something was terribly wrong. I just needed someone to confirm it." "You were brave to run," Jacob said. "I was desperate. There's a difference." Catherine managed a weak smile. "But I'm glad I ran. Otherwise, I never would have met you." The air between them shifted, charged with something neither of them was quite ready to name. Jacob stood abruptly, clearing his throat. "You should rest. You're still healing." But before he left, he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his rough fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "You're not worthless, Catherine," he said, his voice low and intense. "Don't ever think that again." Then he was gone, leaving Catherine touching her cheek where his fingers had been, her heart racing. "You're a mystery, Jacob Thornton," she said one evening as he brought her dinner. It had been 5 days since he'd found her, and she was healing, though slowly. Jacob raised an eyebrow, setting the tray on her lap. "Not much mystery to me. I'm just a farmer. A farmer who sets broken arms like a doctor. A farmer who quotes poetry when he thinks no one's listening. A farmer who keeps books by Whitman and Thoreau on his nightstand." Jacob's cheeks actually colored. "You've been snooping." "I've been observing," Catherine corrected, a small smile tugging at her lips. It was the first time she'd smiled since he'd found her, and Jacob felt his heart skip. "Reading passes the time," he said gruffly. "Gets lonely out here. Why haven't you remarried? Surely the women in town—" "Don't want a man like me," Jacob finished. "I'm too old, too rough, too set in my ways, and I've got nothing to offer but hard work and silence." Catherine studied him carefully. "I don't think that's true. I think you're afraid." Jacob's jaw tightened. Afraid of what? Of letting someone in again, of losing them again. The words hit too close to home. Jacob stood abruptly, taking the empty dishes from her previous meal. You should rest. Jacob, wait. But he was already gone, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Catherine sighed, settling back against the pillows. She'd pushed too hard, ventured too close to wounds that were still raw, but she couldn't help it. Something about this man called to her, made her want to understand him, to ease the loneliness she saw in his eyes. The next morning, Catherine woke to voices downstairs, women's voices, bright and curious. She heard Jacob's deep rumble in response, sounding uncomfortable. A few minutes later, he appeared at her door with two women behind him. One was older, maybe 50, with kind eyes and greying hair. The other was younger, perhaps Catherine's age, pretty with blonde curls and a dress that spoke of town life rather than farm living. Catherine, this is Mrs. Henderson from the general store, and her daughter Emily. They heard about what happened. They brought some things they thought you might need. Mrs. Henderson bustled forward, her arms full of fabric and supplies. Poor dear. When we heard Jacob had found an injured woman on the road, we just had to come help. I brought you some proper dresses. Can't have you wearing Jacob's shirts forever, though I'm sure he doesn't mind. She winked, making Catherine blush, and Jacob clear his throat loudly. Emily hung back, studying Catherine with barely concealed curiosity. Is it true you were running from Thomas Blackwell? Emily, Mrs. Henderson scolded. That's not polite. It's all right, Catherine said quietly. Yes, I was running from him. He wasn't the man he claimed to be. Emily's eyes went wide. Oh, we heard he was looking for you. Came through town 3 days ago, asking questions. Papa told him he hadn't seen any strange women. Sent him toward the Johnson Ranch instead. Jacob's expression darkened. He was in Cedar Springs. Briefly, Mrs. Henderson confirmed. But Sheriff Morrison made it clear he wasn't welcome, especially after Jacob sent word about what happened. Don't you worry, dear, she said to Catherine. The whole town knows what kind of man Blackwell is now. Nobody's going to help him find you. The women stayed for an hour, measuring Catherine for dresses, chattering about town gossip, and generally filling the quiet house with feminine energy it hadn't seen in years. Catherine found herself enjoying their company, even as she was aware of Emily's assessing glances toward Jacob. After they left, Jacob seemed restless, pacing the kitchen while Catherine sat in a chair by the window, her arm still splintered, but her mobility improving. You didn't have to accept their charity, Jacob said finally. I could have bought you dresses in town. They were being kind, Catherine replied. Besides, Mrs. Henderson is a talented seamstress. She showed me some of her work. Emily was staring at you like you were a puzzle to solve. Catherine smiled slightly. She was staring at you, actually. I think she's disappointed you're harboring a rescued woman instead of being available for courting. Jacob snorted. Emily Henderson has been trying to catch my attention for 2 years. Her mother keeps inviting me to Sunday dinner, and you always say no. Always. Jacob moved to the window, standing beside Catherine's chair. I'm not interested in Emily Henderson. Why not? She's pretty, young, clearly interested. She's not you. The words hung in the air between them. Catherine's breath caught as Jacob turned to look down at her, his expression unguarded for once. Jacob, I know I shouldn't say things like that, he interrupted. You're injured, vulnerable, dependent on me for safety. It's not right for me to feel the way I'm starting to feel. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. But I can't help it, Catherine. Ever since I found you on that road, something's been different. Something's woken up inside me that I thought was dead. Catherine's heart was racing. She stood carefully, using the chair for balance, and reached out to touch his arm. What if I feel it too? Jacob's eyes darkened. You don't know what you're saying. You're grateful, that's all. Once you're healed, once you're strong again, you'll realize... I'll realize what? Catherine challenged. Catherine, that I've fallen for a good, honorable man who treats me with respect. That I feel safer with you than I've felt in years, that when you touch me, even just to change my bandages, my whole body comes alive. Jacob groaned, his control visibly fraying. Catherine, don't what? Tell you the truth? She stepped closer, tilting her head back to meet his eyes. I'm not Margaret, Jacob, I know that, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're both broken people who found each other at exactly the right time. You're not broken, Jacob said fiercely, his hands coming up to cup her face. You're the strongest person I've ever met. running from that monster, surviving being left for dead, healing with grace and courage. That's not broken, Catherine. That's remarkable. Then stop treating me like I'm made of glass, Catherine whispered. Stop holding yourself back because you think it's the noble thing to do. I'm a grown woman, Jacob. I know my own mind, and I know I want—" But she never finished the sentence. Jacob's mouth came down on hers, swallowing her words in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. Catherine melted into him, her good arm wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "This is crazy," he murmured. "We barely know each other." "Then let's get to know each other," Catherine suggested. "We have time, do we?" Jacob's expression turned serious. "Thomas Blackwell is still out there. He's still looking for you. And I'm just a farmer, Catherine. I don't have money or influence or powerful friends. If he comes back with lawyers or hired guns, then we'll face it together," Catherine said firmly. "But Jacob, I'm not going to live in fear. I did that for too long with my father, with Thomas. I'm done running, done hiding." She gestured between them. "This is the first real thing I've felt in years. I'm not giving it up without a fight." Jacob searched her face, looking for doubt, for uncertainty. He found only determination and something else that made his heart skip. "Hope, you're remarkable," he said again, pulling her close. "Absolutely remarkable." They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, and both of them knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. That night, Catherine woke to the sound of breaking glass. Her heart hammered as she heard voices downstairs, Jacob's low and dangerous, and another she didn't recognize. "Where is she, Thornton?" Catherine's blood ran cold. "Thomas." She struggled out of bed, her body protesting, and crept to the door. Through the crack, she could see down to the first floor where Jacob stood facing 3 men. Thomas Blackwell stood in the center, flanked by 2 hired guns. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jacob said calmly, though Catherine could see the tension in his shoulders. "Don't play games with me. I know she's here. That horse she stole was found 2 miles down the road, and you're the only farm in this direction." Thomas's voice was smooth, educated, and utterly cold. "Catherine is my fiancée. She had an episode, ran off in a confused state. I'm here to bring her home where she belongs." "Your fiancée, you say?" Jacob's voice was deceptively mild. "Funny thing about that. Word reached me from Denver yesterday. Seems you already have a wife." Thomas's expression hardened. "That's none of your concern." "It is when you beat a woman and leave her to die on my land." Jacob's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "That makes it very much my concern. You don't know what you're interfering with, farmer. I'm a wealthy man. I have connections. I could make your life very difficult. And I'm a man defending my home and my guest," Jacob replied. "And in Wyoming, that gives me every right to shoot you if you don't get off my property." Catherine saw Thomas nod to one of his men, saw the gun coming up, and she didn't think. She threw open the door and screamed, "No!" All eyes turned to her as she stumbled to the top of the stairs, clutching the railing for support. Thomas's face twisted into something ugly. "There you are, my dear. Come down here. We're leaving." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Catherine said, her voice shaking but firm. "You have a wife, Thomas. You lied to me and my father, and you tried to kill me." "I did no such thing. I merely taught you a lesson about obedience, one you clearly still need to learn." Thomas started toward the stairs, but Jacob moved faster, putting himself between Thomas and the staircase. "She said no," Jacob growled. "Time for you to leave." Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Or what, you'll fight me? You're 1 man against 3. Be reasonable, Thornton. Give me the girl, and I'll compensate you for your trouble." "She's not property to be bought and sold," Jacob said flatly. "And I said, get off my land." Everything happened at once. Thomas nodded sharply, his man raised his gun fully, and Jacob moved with surprising speed for such a large man. He grabbed the rifle that had been leaning against the wall and swung it up in one smooth motion. The shot was deafening in the small space. The hired gun stumbled backward, his weapon clattering to the floor, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. "Next one won't be a flesh wound," Jacob said coldly, his rifle now trained on Thomas. "And before you get any ideas, there's already someone riding for the sheriff. Neighbor of mine saw you and your men coming up the road. Got suspicious. Sheriff Morrison should be here in about 10 minutes. It was a bluff. Jacob had no neighbors close enough to see the road, but Thomas didn't know that. Catherine watched as the calculation played across his face, weighing his options. "This isn't over," Thomas snarled. "Catherine, you're making a mistake. You think this farmer wants you? Look at yourself. You're damaged goods now. No one will want you. I want her." Jacob's words rang out clear and strong. Catherine's breath caught as he continued, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "Catherine stays here, under my protection, as my wife, if she'll have me." The world seemed to tilt. Catherine gripped the railing harder, her heart pounding. Jacob hadn't looked at her, hadn't asked her, but she understood. He was giving her a way out, a protection that even Thomas's money couldn't touch. A married woman couldn't be forced to return to her father, couldn't be claimed by another man. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll marry you." Thomas's face purpled with rage. "You can't be serious. You don't even know this man." "I know enough," Catherine said, her voice growing stronger. "I know he's kind. I know he's honorable. I know he would never raise a hand to me." She met Thomas's eyes directly. "I know he's 10 times the man you'll ever be." For a moment, Catherine thought Thomas might rush the stairs anyway. Consequences be damned. But then they all heard it. The sound of horses approaching fast. Multiple horses. Thomas's expression turned calculating. He backed toward the door, his remaining healthy gunman supporting the wounded one. "This isn't over," he repeated. "I'll be back with lawyers, with documentation. You can't keep her." "Try me," Jacob said simply. As Thomas and his men disappeared into the night, Jacob finally lowered his rifle. His hands were steady, but Catherine could see the tension in every line of his body. He stood there, staring at the broken door, until Catherine spoke. "Jacob?" He turned to look up at her, and she saw something in his eyes she couldn't quite name. Fear, maybe, or hope. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have said that without asking you first, but it was the only way I could think to—" "I meant it," Catherine interrupted, making her way carefully down the stairs. "When I said yes, I meant it." Jacob watched her descend, ready to catch her if she stumbled. When she reached the bottom, they stood facing each other in the lamplight, the remains of the confrontation scattered around them. "Catherine, you don't have to do this. I can protect you without marriage. We can find another way." "What if I want to marry you?" Catherine asked softly. "What if I've been thinking about it for days now?" Jacob's breath caught. "Why would you want that? You barely know me, and I'm too old for you, too rough. You deserve better than a lonely farmer." Catherine stepped closer, tilting her head back to look up at him. Even injured, even wearing his oversized shirt, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "You saved my life," she said quietly. "But more than that, you've been gentle with me, patient. You've given me safety and kindness when I needed it most. You've made me feel valued when I felt worthless." She reached up with her good hand, touching his rough cheek. "Maybe I don't know everything about you yet, but I know you're a good man, Jacob Thornton, and I'd be honored to be your wife." Jacob caught her hand, holding it against his face. His eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, they were bright with emotion. "I don't deserve you," he whispered, "but I swear I'll spend every day trying to. That's all I ask," Catherine replied. Jacob pulled her carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries, and held her close. Catherine melted against his broad chest, feeling his heart beating strong and steady beneath her cheek. This was what safety felt like. This was what home felt like. "We should probably actually send for the sheriff now," Jacob murmured against her hair. "Make this official before Thomas comes back with those lawyers he mentioned." Catherine laughed softly, the sound surprising them both. "Practical, even in a proposal." "It wasn't much of a proposal," Jacob admitted. "You deserve better than that too." "It was perfect," Catherine said firmly. "It was real." They stood there in the wreckage of Jacob's living room, holding each other, until the sound of horses announced the actual arrival of Sheriff Morrison, drawn by the sound of gunfire. By the time the sun rose the next morning, statements had been taken, the wounded gunman arrested, and a warrant issued for Thomas Blackwell on charges of attempted murder, bigamy, and assault. 2 days later, Jacob and Catherine stood before the minister in Cedar Springs, surrounded by curious townspeople who'd heard the story of the abandoned bride and the farmer who'd saved her. Catherine wore a simple dress borrowed from the minister's wife, her arm still in a splint, her face still bearing faint bruises. Jacob wore his best suit, his hair neatly combed, his large hands trembling slightly as he took Catherine's good hand in his. "Do you, Jacob Thornton, take Catherine Miller to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Jacob said clearly, his eyes locked on Catherine's. "And do you, Catherine Miller, take Jacob Thornton to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Catherine smiled, her heart full. I do." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob bent to kiss her carefully, reverently, as if she were made of glass. It was a chaste kiss, gentle and sweet, but Catherine felt it all the way to her toes. As they walked out of the church together, Catherine leaned against Jacob's solid warmth, feeling the curious stares, hearing the whispered conversations. She didn't care. Let them talk, let them wonder. She knew the truth. The farmhouse felt different when they returned to it as husband and wife. The broken door had been repaired, the blood cleaned from the floor, but the memory of that night lingered. "Are you having second thoughts?" Jacob asked as they stood in the kitchen, suddenly awkward with each other now that the ceremony was over. "No," Catherine said immediately. "Are you?" "No," Jacob admitted, "but I want you to know. I don't expect anything from you. This marriage, it was for protection, and that's all it has to be. You can have your own room, your own space. I won't," he struggled with the words, "I won't force my attentions on you." Gee, Catherine felt a rush of warmth for this honorable, careful man. "And if I want your attentions?" Jacob's head snapped up, his eyes searching hers. "Catherine, I'm still healing," she said quickly, "and I need time. But Jacob, when I'm ready, I want this to be a real marriage in every way." Jacob's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Catherine stepped closer, looking up at him. "You make me feel safe, but you also make me feel something else. Something I've never felt before." "What's that?" Jacob's voice was rough, hopeful. "Wanted," Catherine whispered. "Cherished, like I matter." Jacob cupped her face gently in his large hands. "You do matter, more than you know." He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Catherine felt heat bloom in her chest. His lips were gentle but hungry, controlled but desperate. She could feel him holding back, feel the restraint in every careful touch. "I'm not going to break," she murmured against his mouth. "I know," Jacob replied, "but I'm going to treat you like you might anyway. Because you're precious to me, Catherine, more precious than anything I've ever had." Over the following weeks, Catherine healed. Her arm knitted slowly, her bruises faded, and her ribs stopped aching with every breath. But more than her body healed, her heart did too. She learned Jacob's rhythms, his quiet ways. She learned he sang old war songs while he worked in the fields. She learned he couldn't sleep without checking all the doors twice. She learned he had nightmares sometimes, waking with a gasp, and that he never wanted to talk about them. She learned he was unfailingly gentle, patient beyond measure, and far more romantic than his rough exterior suggested. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow. He read poetry to her in the evenings, his deep voice bringing the words to life. He made her laugh with dry observations about the chickens' personalities. And Jacob learned about Catherine too. He learned she hummed while she cooked. He learned she was fiercely intelligent, with opinions on everything from politics to farming techniques. He learned she had a gift for growing things, transforming his neglected kitchen garden into something beautiful. He learned she still flinched at sudden movements, still woke from nightmares about Thomas. He learned the way she liked her coffee, the stories that made her smile, the dreams she'd abandoned and was beginning to dream again. They grew together, learning the dance of marriage, finding their rhythm. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, Catherine stood at the kitchen window watching the sunset paint the fields gold. Her arm was out of the splint now, her injuries fully healed. Jacob came up behind her, not touching, just standing close. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. Catherine turned to face him, her heart full. "I'm thinking about how strange life is. 2 months ago I thought my life was over. I thought I was going to die on that roadside. And now?" Jacob's voice was careful, uncertain. "Now I'm thinking about how I've never been happier." Catherine stepped closer, closing the distance between them. "I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you stopped, that you cared enough to help a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Jacob murmured. "You're my wife." "Yes," Catherine agreed, her voice dropping lower. "I am. And Jacob, I'm ready now for this to be a real marriage." She saw his breath catch, saw the desire flare in his eyes before he carefully banked it. "Catherine, you don't have to." "I want to," she interrupted, placing her hand on his chest, feeling his heart racing beneath her palm. "I want you, Jacob. All of you." Jacob groaned softly, his control visibly fraying. "Are you sure? Because once I start, I don't know if I can hold back. It's been so long, and you're so beautiful, and I want you so much it scares me." Catherine felt a thrill run through her at his words, at the raw need in his voice. "Then don't hold back. I trust you." Catherine, but she silenced him with a kiss, bold and sure, and she felt the moment his control snapped. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and he kissed her with a hunger that had been building for weeks. Catherine gasped against his mouth, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer. "Bedroom!" Jacob growled against her lips. "I'm not doing this in the kitchen." He swept her up in his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her up the stairs. Catherine's heart raced with anticipation and nervousness. But when Jacob laid her gently on the bed and looked down at her with such love and desire in his eyes, the nervousness faded. "You're so beautiful," he whispered, his calloused fingers gentle as they traced her face. "I can't believe you're mine. I can't believe you're mine," Catherine replied, pulling him down to her. They learned each other slowly, carefully, Jacob's gentleness never wavering even as his passion grew. He worshipped her with his hands, his lips, his words, making her feel cherished and desired in ways she'd never imagined. When they finally came together, Catherine cried out, not in pain, but in joy, in the rightness of it. Jacob held her close, murmuring her name like a prayer, moving with her in a rhythm as old as time. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, breathless and satisfied, and Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. "Did I hurt you?" Jacob asked immediately, concern flooding his voice. "No," Catherine said, laughing through her tears. "No, you didn't hurt me. I'm just happy. So incredibly happy." Jacob pulled her closer, tucking her head under his chin. "So am I," he admitted quietly. "I never thought I'd feel this way again. Never thought I'd have this." "We have it now," Catherine murmured. "We have each other." As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, neither of them heard the rider who paused on the road outside Jacob's property. Thomas Blackwell sat on his horse, staring at the farmhouse with cold eyes. The warrant for his arrest meant nothing. He had lawyers, money, influence. He'd beaten the charges, just as he knew he would. But he hadn't forgotten Catherine, hadn't forgiven her betrayal, and he definitely hadn't forgiven Jacob Thornton for interfering. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But Thomas Blackwell had underestimated one crucial thing, the lengths a man would go to protect the woman he loved. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Catherine's life. She and Jacob settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. The farmhouse that had been so silent and lonely for years now rang with laughter and conversation. Catherine transformed it, adding curtains she'd sewn herself, filling vases with wildflowers, bringing warmth to every corner. Jacob found himself smiling more, the hard lines of his face softening. He'd wake each morning with Catherine in his arms and marvel at his good fortune. She was his wife, his partner, his love. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 3 years had vanished completely. But happiness, Catherine was learning, was something that had to be protected. It was a Tuesday morning in late September when Sheriff Morrison rode up to the farm, his expression grim. Catherine was hanging laundry when she saw him, and her heart sank. She knew, even before he dismounted, that this had something to do with Thomas. "Jacob!" she called, and her husband emerged from the barn, his eyes immediately finding hers, reading her fear. "Sheriff," Jacob said as Morrison approached. "What brings you out here?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "Got some news you're not going to like, Thornton. Thomas Blackwell's lawyers got the charges dropped. Judge ruled there wasn't enough evidence for attempted murder, and the bigamy charge didn't stick because apparently his wife in Denver signed some kind of legal separation years ago." Jacob's jaw tightened. And he's filing a lawsuit. Says Catherine was legally promised to him, that her father signed a contract. He's demanding she return to fulfill the agreement, or that you pay substantial damages for harboring her. "That's ridiculous," Catherine said, stepping forward. "I'm married now, to Jacob. That contract is void." "I know that, and you know that, but Blackwell's got expensive lawyers who are arguing otherwise. They're saying the contract supersedes the marriage because the marriage happened after Catherine ran away." Morrison looked miserable. "I'm not saying they're right, I'm just saying this could get ugly." "Let it get ugly," Jacob said flatly. "Catherine's my wife. She stays with me." "Jacob," Catherine started, fear clutching at her heart. "No." Jacob turned to her, his expression fierce. "I meant what I said that night, Catherine. You're mine. I protect what's mine. No fancy lawyer is going to change that." Morrison nodded approvingly. "That's what I wanted to hear. But Thornton, you should know. Blackwell's not just coming at this legally. Word is, he's been making threats, hiring men. He wants Catherine back, and he doesn't much care how he gets her. Let him try, Jacob said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. After Morrison left, Catherine and Jacob stood in the yard, the morning sun suddenly cold. I should leave, Catherine said quietly. I should go somewhere far away, somewhere he can't find me. I won't let him hurt you because of me. Jacob turned to her, his hands gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. You're not going anywhere. Do you understand me? This is your home. I'm your husband, and I'll be damned if I let Thomas Blackwell or anyone else take you from me. But what if? No what ifs. Jacob pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. We face this together. That's what marriage means. Catherine clung to him, drawing strength from his solid warmth. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I, Jacob confessed. But I'm more scared of losing you, and that's not going to happen. That night, Jacob taught Catherine how to shoot. They stood in the meadow behind the house, the rifle heavy in her hands. If I'm not here, Jacob said quietly, and someone comes, I need to know you can defend yourself. Where would you be? Catherine asked, fear lacing her voice. Just in case, Jacob said firmly. Now focus. See that bottle on the fence post? Catherine aimed, her hands shaking slightly. When she fired, the bottle exploded in a satisfying shower of glass. Good, Jacob said, pride in his voice. Again, they practiced until Catherine could hit the target consistently, until the gun felt less foreign in her hands. As the sun set, Jacob pulled her close. I meant what I said earlier, he murmured against her hair. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we face it together. Together, Catherine agreed, tilting her face up for his kiss. But as they walked back to the house hand in hand, neither of them saw the figure watching from the tree line, taking note of their routines, their defenses, their vulnerabilities. The attack came 3 nights later. Catherine woke to the smell of smoke and Jacob's urgent voice in her ear. Catherine, wake up, the barn's on fire. She bolted upright, seeing the orange glow through the window. How? Doesn't matter. I need to save the horses and livestock. Stay in the house. Keep the rifle close, and don't open the door for anyone but me. Jacob was already moving, pulling on his boots. Jacob! Wait! But he was gone, running toward the burning barn. Catherine grabbed the rifle with shaking hands, positioning herself at the window where she could see both the barn and the approach to the house. The fire was spreading fast, too fast to be natural. This was deliberate. She watched Jacob disappear into the smoke-filled barn and emerge moments later leading 2 panicked horses. He went back in again and again, saving what he could. Catherine's heart was in her throat the entire time, terrified the building would collapse on him. Then she saw them. 3 figures approaching the house from the opposite direction, using the fire as a distraction. One of them was Thomas. Catherine's hands tightened on the rifle. She moved to the door, positioning herself just inside, and waited. Catherine! Thomas's voice called out. I know you're in there. Come out now, and this can end peacefully. Go away, Thomas! Catherine shouted back. I'm not going with you. I'm married. A marriage based on fraud. The courts will annul it. Come out now, or my men will come in and get you. Catherine raised the rifle, aiming through the window. Jacob taught me how to shoot. Come any closer and I'll prove it. She heard Thomas laugh, cold and cruel. You think you can stop 3 of us? Be reasonable, Catherine. Your farmer husband is busy with that fire. By the time he realizes what's happening, you'll be long gone. But Thomas had underestimated 2 things. First, Catherine's determination to protect her home and her marriage. And second, Jacob's awareness of exactly what was happening. As Thomas's men rushed the door, Catherine fired through the window, the shot deliberate and accurate. One of the men went down with a cry, clutching his leg. The other hesitated, giving Catherine time to reload. And then Jacob was there, appearing from the shadows where he'd circled around after securing the animals. His rifle was trained on Thomas, his expression deadly. Get off my property, Jacob said quietly. Now, Thomas spun, his eyes widening as he took in the situation. Jacob stood between him and the house, covered in soot and ash, but very much present. His wounded man was on the ground, and Catherine's rifle barrel was visible in the window, aimed at the second hired gun. You can't keep her, Thornton, Thomas snarled. She's mine by right of contract. She's mine by right of marriage and love, Jacob replied. And you're going to leave now, or I'm going to shoot you for arson and attempted kidnapping. You wouldn't dare! Jacob's rifle shifted and a shot rang out. The bullet hit the ground inches from Thomas's feet. "The next one goes through your knee," Jacob said conversationally. "Then the other knee. Then we'll discuss your other crimes. What'll it be?" Thomas's face contorted with rage, but he was beaten, and he knew it. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yeah, it is," Jacob said flatly. "Sheriff Morrison is already on his way. I sent word as soon as I saw the smoke. You'll be arrested for arson, attempted kidnapping, and harassment. And this time, I've got witnesses. My neighbor saw you and your men setting the fire." Catherine watched through the window as Thomas and his remaining man retreated, supporting their wounded companion. She didn't lower the rifle until they were completely out of sight. When Jacob finally came inside, they fell into each other's arms, both shaking with reaction. "The barn," Catherine started. "We can rebuild it," Jacob said firmly. "What matters is you're safe. We're safe." "I was so scared," Catherine admitted, tears finally coming. "When you went into that burning building, I had to save what I could." "But Catherine," Jacob pulled back to look at her, his eyes intense. "You were magnificent, the way you held them off, the way you stood your ground. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life." Catherine laughed shakily. "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what needs to be done anyway." Jacob kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You're stronger than you know." Sheriff Morrison arrived within the hour, along with several deputized townsmen. They arrested Thomas Blackwell and his men on multiple charges. This time, with Jacob's neighbor as a witness to the arson, and with Catherine's testimony about the attempted kidnapping, the charges stuck. Thomas was led away in chains, still shouting threats and promises of revenge. But Catherine knew it was over, really over. He'd lost, and he'd have to face the consequences of his actions. The days following the attack were busy ones. The entire town rallied to help rebuild Jacob's barn. Men showed up at dawn with lumber and tools. Women brought food and supplies. It was a community effort that touched both Catherine and Jacob deeply. "I never expected this," Jacob admitted quietly to Catherine as they watched the barn frame going up. "I've kept to myself for so long, I forgot what it was like to be part of something bigger." "You're not alone anymore," Catherine said, squeezing his hand. "We're not alone. We have each other, and we have this community." During the rebuilding, Catherine got to know the townspeople better. Mrs. Henderson became a dear friend, teaching Catherine her sewing techniques and sharing recipes. Even Emily Henderson, who'd initially been cool toward Catherine, warmed up once she met a young carpenter who'd come to help with the barn. "I owe you an apology," Emily said one afternoon as she and Catherine prepared food for the workers. "I was jealous when you married Jacob. I'd had my eye on him for 2 years. Catherine looked at her in surprise. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. Jacob never gave me any encouragement." Emily smiled ruefully. "Looking at you two together, I understand why. He was waiting for you. The way he looks at you, that's real love. I hope Thomas and I can have that someday." "Thomas?" Catherine raised an eyebrow. Emily blushed. "The carpenter, Thomas Reed. He's nothing like your Thomas Blackwell. Thank God. He's kind and funny, and he makes me feel special." Catherine squeezed her hand. "I'm happy for you, Emily, and I appreciate you telling me how you felt." That took courage. As the barn neared completion, Catherine realized she'd found something she never expected, a place where she belonged, not just with Jacob, but in this community, in this life they were building together. One evening, after the workers had gone home and they were alone in the house, Jacob pulled Catherine close. "I've been thinking," he said quietly. "About what?" "About how lucky I am, about how my life has changed since the day I found you." Jacob cupped her face gently. "I was just existing before, Catherine, going through the motions. But you brought me back to life." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. "You saved my life, Jacob, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Jacob murmured, kissing her softly. "And I want to keep doing that, every day for the rest of our lives." A week later, the barn was finished. The community gathered for a celebration, a barn dance complete with music, food, and laughter. Catherine watched as couples whirled across the new wooden floor, as children ran and played, as the whole town came together in joy. Jacob found her standing at the edge of the crowd, a soft smile on her face. "Dance with me?" he asked, holding out his hand. Catherine took it without hesitation. "I'd love to." They moved onto the floor, and Jacob pulled her close. He wasn't a graceful dancer. His movements were a bit stiff, his steps sometimes uncertain, But Catherine didn't care. Being in his arms, feeling the solid warmth of him, hearing his heartbeat beneath her ear, that was all she needed. "Happy?" Jacob asked softly. "So happy," Catherine confirmed. "More than I ever thought possible." As they swayed to the music, surrounded by friends and neighbors, Catherine thought about how far she'd come. From that desperate girl in a torn wedding dress, left to die on a roadside, to this, a woman loved and cherished, part of a community, safe and secure in her husband's arms. The music changed to a slower song, and Jacob pulled her even closer. "I love you, Catherine Thornton," he whispered against her hair, "more than I have words to say." "I love you too," Catherine whispered back. "Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for letting me," Jacob replied. "Thank you for giving me a reason to live again." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The harvest came in abundant, better than Jacob had seen in years. Catherine's garden flourished, providing vegetables for their table and enough extra to share with neighbors. The new barn stood strong and proud, a symbol of what they'd overcome together. Catherine found herself thinking often about the future, about the children she hoped they'd have, about growing old with Jacob, about building a legacy together. But she kept these thoughts to herself, not wanting to pressure him, not knowing if he was ready for that kind of hope. Then one morning, Catherine woke feeling queasy. She made it to the wash basin just in time, her stomach rebelling against nothing at all. Jacob was instantly at her side, concern etched across his face. "Are you all right? Should I fetch the doctor?" Catherine shook her head, realization dawning. No, I think I'm... Jacob, I think I might be pregnant." The words hung in the air between them. Jacob's eyes went wide, his hand instinctively reaching for her still flat belly. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not certain yet, but all the signs, I think so." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he pulled back, she saw tears on his face too. "A baby," he repeated, his voice full of wonder. "Catherine, I never thought, after Margaret, after all these years alone, I never thought I'd have a family again." "Are you happy?" Catherine asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy?" Jacob laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Catherine, I'm beyond happy. I'm blessed. After Margaret died, I thought I'd never have a family again. I thought I'd grow old alone, and now," his voice broke, "now I have you, and soon we'll have a child. I have everything I never dared to dream of." Catherine kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. "We're going to be happy, aren't we? Really, truly happy." "We already are," Jacob said firmly. "Everything else is just more blessing on top of blessing." The months that followed were filled with preparation and joy. Jacob became even more protective, insisting Catherine rest more, refusing to let her do heavy work. Catherine found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating. "I'm pregnant, not made of porcelain," she told him one afternoon as he gently but firmly took the laundry basket from her hands. "I know that," Jacob replied, his jaw set stubbornly, "but I'm not taking any chances. You and this baby are the most precious things in my life." Mrs. Henderson visited often, bringing baby clothes she'd sewn and sharing wisdom from her own experiences, raising Emily and her 3 sons. "The first one is always the scariest," she confided, "but you'll do fine, Catherine, and Jacob will be a wonderful father." "How can you be sure?" Catherine asked, her hands resting on her growing belly. "Because I see the way he looks at you, the way he talks about this baby. That man would walk through fire for his family." Mrs. Henderson patted Catherine's hand. "You're both going to be just fine." As Catherine's belly grew, so did Jacob's wonder. He would spend evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick, his face filled with awe. "He's strong," Jacob would say, his voice full of pride. "Or she," Catherine would counter with a smile. "Boy or girl, doesn't matter, as long as the baby is healthy and you're safe." But as her due date approached, Catherine could see the fear creeping into Jacob's eyes. He tried to hide it, but she knew him too well now. "Talk to me," she said one night as they lay in bed, her back against his chest, his hand protective over their unborn child. "About what?" Jacob's voice was carefully neutral. "About what's scaring you?" Jacob was quiet for so long, Catherine thought he wouldn't answer. Then, his voice rough with emotion, he said, "Margaret died in childbirth. Not our child. She was helping her sister deliver. There were complications, and Margaret insisted on helping. She caught the fever from the birthing room," and his arms tightened around Catherine. Catherine. I can't lose you, Catherine. I can't. Catherine turned in his arms to face him, seeing the fear and pain in his eyes. Jacob, that was different. That was fever, not childbirth itself. And I'm strong. I'm healthy. Dr. Matthews says everything is progressing perfectly. I know what the doctor says, but Catherine, if something happens, if I have to choose, nothing is going to happen, Catherine said firmly, cupping his face. And if, God forbid, something does go wrong, you choose the baby. Do you hear me? You choose our child. No, Jacob said fiercely. Don't ask me to do that. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Catherine held his gaze. This baby is our future, Jacob, our legacy, and I need to know that you'll protect our child no matter what. Catherine, promise me. Jacob closed his eyes, pain written across his face. I promise, he finally whispered, but you have to promise me something too. Promise me you'll fight. Promise me you won't leave me. I promise, Catherine said, meaning it with everything she had. I'm not going anywhere. We're going to raise this baby together, watch them grow, maybe have more children. We're going to grow old together on this farm, Jacob Thornton. That's my promise to you. They held each other through the night, both praying that promise would be kept. The baby came in late spring, on a morning when the prairie was covered in wildflowers and the air was sweet with the scent of new grass. Catherine's labor started just after dawn, and Jacob immediately sent for Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Henderson. The labor was long and difficult. Catherine had never known pain like this, wave after wave of it crashing over her. But through it all, Jacob was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. You're doing so well, he told her, his voice steady even though she could see the fear in his eyes. You're so strong, Catherine, so brave. I can't, Catherine gasped between contractions. I can't do this. Yes, you can, Jacob said firmly. You're the strongest person I know. You survived Thomas. You survived being left for dead. You survived everything life threw at you. You can do this. Mrs. Henderson bustled around the room, preparing supplies, while Dr. Matthews examined Catherine again. Not much longer now, the doctor said encouragingly. I can see the baby's head. Next few pushes should do it. Catherine gripped Jacob's hand so hard she thought she might break it, but he never flinched, never pulled away. His presence was her anchor, keeping her grounded through the pain. I love you, she managed to gasp. Jacob, I love you so much. I love you too, Jacob replied, his voice thick with emotion. More than anything, you're going to be fine. We're going to have our baby, and you're going to be fine. With one final tremendous effort, Catherine pushed. The room filled with the sound of a baby's cry, strong and healthy and furious at being thrust into the world. It's a boy, Dr. Matthews announced, holding up the squalling infant. A healthy baby boy. Catherine collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but elated. Jacob was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he watched Dr. Matthews clean and wrap their son. He's perfect, the doctor said, placing the baby in Catherine's arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, healthy lungs. You've got yourself a fine boy. Catherine looked down at her son, at their son, and felt her heart overflow. He had Jacob's dark hair and a tiny, wrinkled face that was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Matthew, she whispered, using the name they'd chosen. Matthew Jacob Thornton. Jacob leaned over them both, one large finger gently touching his son's tiny hand. Matthew immediately gripped it, and Jacob's face crumpled. He's perfect, Jacob whispered, his voice breaking. Catherine, he's perfect. We made him, Catherine said softly, looking up at her husband with love. You and me, together. Jacob kissed her forehead, then her lips, then placed the gentlest of kisses on Matthew's tiny head. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Thank you for this, for him, for giving me a family when I thought I'd never have one again. We're a family now, Catherine said, tears streaming down her face. The 3 of us, a real family. Dr. Matthews and Mrs. Henderson quietly left the room, giving the new family privacy. Jacob sat on the bed beside Catherine, his arm around her shoulders, both of them gazing in wonder at their son. I never thought I'd have this, Jacob said quietly. After Margaret, after 3 years alone, I thought my life would just be the farm, work until I was too old to work, die alone in this house. And then you came into my life, and everything changed. You saved my life, Catherine reminded him, her head resting on his shoulder. You saved mine too, Jacob countered. You brought light back into my world. You gave me hope. You gave me love. And now, he looked down at Matthew, sleeping peacefully in Catherine's arms. Now you've given me a son. I don't have words for what that means to me. They sat there for hours, just the three of them, marveling at the new life they'd created. Matthew slept and woke and cried and nursed, and through it all Jacob watched with the wonder of a man who'd been given a precious gift he never expected to receive. As the sun began to set, painting the room in golden light, Catherine looked at her husband and son and felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" she asked quietly. "When you found me on the road." Jacob's eyes met hers. "I said, 'You're mine now,' and I am," Catherine confirmed, shifting so she could kiss him softly. "Completely and absolutely yours, just as you're mine. And now Matthew is ours, and we're his, and we're a family. Always," Jacob promised, wrapping his arms around both his wife and son. "Forever and always." Years later, standing on the porch of their expanded farmhouse, watching Matthew play in the yard with his younger sister Sarah, Catherine would think back to that moment on the roadside. She'd been broken, abandoned, left for dead. She'd thought her life was over. Instead, it had been the beginning of love, of healing, of a family and a home more wonderful than anything she could have imagined. Jacob came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her head. "What are you thinking about?" "How grateful I am that you stopped that day," Catherine said softly. "How different my life would be if you just kept driving." "I couldn't have kept driving," Jacob admitted. "Something pulled me to stop. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was just the universe knowing we belonged together." He turned her in his arms to face him. "All I know is finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me." "Finding each other," Catherine corrected. "We found each other." As the sun set over the Wyoming prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Jacob kissed his wife, surrounded by the sounds of their children's laughter, the warmth of their home, the promise of tomorrow. They'd both been lost, both been broken, but together they'd found healing, they'd found home, they'd found love that was real and true and lasting. And as Jacob had whispered to Catherine all those months ago on that dusty road, she was his, and he was hers forever.